I want to shift a little bit here with my second question for you. So I think that, and this is one of the things that I've admired the most about what you've done. And having followed you for a while, I followed you sort of before you came up with this 10K work
Mhm.
kind of branding. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant. But so I think one of the toughest and most valuable things to do as a creator, an entrepreneur, somebody in this sort of expertise space is the branding and packaging of the core ideas of what you
Mhm.
teach or sell or your branding and sort of the distillation of all these concepts into this 10K work concept is one of the best examples I've seen of that, because I think it's very easy and very quick for people, even if they're brand new to you,
Mhm.
understand, oh my God, I get it. And to
Yep.
very quickly apply it to themselves and go, are these things that I'm doing
Mhm.
$100 work or 10K work, whatever.
Mhm.
So what I'd like to hear, or what I'm curious to hear is, can you explain how you came up with the sort of branding and presentation of it, the 10K idea you
Mm.
take, and not just how you did it, but your advice for anyone else that's trying to
Yeah.
figure out, how do I take this complex set of ideas and boil it down into a clear, simple
Mm.
package?
Wonderful. That's a 10K question.
Right.
So I want to start with a metaphor. Imagine a giant wall, a giant blank wall, and next to me, there's a pot full of spaghetti. And all you see is just me throwing spaghetti against that wall. And that's basically how 10K, you might have seen it, all
Mhm.
of the prior attempts, but let me try to break it down a few ways. One is that I've always thought about what makes something catchy, right? But I'm a words person. So for me, I've always gravitated towards alliterations. That's why Rad Reads. And if you think about it, Rad Reads,
Yeah.
Jamba Juice, Barry's Boot Camp, Best Buy, right? It's not a coincidence, Coca-Cola, like that some of our most iconic and well-known brands are alliterations. And the reason I bring that up is because you could say that's a formula, right? Again, no one said like alliteration is a formula, but I'm sure someone's written that somewhere. But through the power of observation, I'm like, wow, what is it about these names that are so catchy? And so this is a pattern that I have. When something grabs my attention, I kind of like ponder it. You can't unsee it. I can never look at a brand name without checking to see if there's an alliteration. And you could take it a step further. I do this. Copywriters, what they have called swipe files.
Yeah.
You see something interesting, just collect it in some kind of notebook. So I swipe good names, good copy. So that'd be one thing. The other thing is really thinking about the packaging of an idea. And so I always was obsessed with the Eisenhower matrix, because I thought it was just like it was a very clever way to distill a very complex idea visually.
Yeah. For
And
people who don't know what that is, can you
oh,
just take
for
them
people who don't
through
know what
the,
it is, it's a 2x2 matrix. Picture four squares, side a square, and each quadrant has different levels of prioritization: important and urgent, important, not urgent, and so on and so forth. And
Mhm.
the thinking and not thinking, it works. You put your task into these different things, buckets, and then it works. Now, I'm a left brain thinker. I'm a former engineer. And so I think of things very logically. Like I like
Mhm.
to take messy things and put order around them. So I've always liked matrices, and I gravitated towards matrices. The Eisenhower matrix. Some of you might remember Venkatesh Rao, who's like
Mhm.
an old school blogger, and he would always put things in matrices. Like he'd take all these weird concepts and just put them in matrices. And I loved it. And I
Mhm.
was just like, oh, this is so natural. This is so cool. Some of you might know the Kim Scott. She wrote a great leadership book called Radical Candor. And she described 4 styles of leadership into a 2x2 matrix. And so I kept seeing these matrices. And I was like, it just planted this seed in and I would just write about the matrix, someone else's matrix, because I just thought it's a very powerful framing tool. And so what was happening subconsciously was similar to the alliterations. Every time I was seeing a bunch of ideas, I had a little formula to put them into, oh, could this fit into 4 boxes across 2 axes? And that took many years. So that was another thing. The next thing that came in, so that's how the visual part came in. The next thing that came in was copywriting. And copywriting, for those of you who are not familiar, is basically, it's not writing. It's a very specific style of writing to try to persuade someone to do something, to take an action. So you could be like subscribe. You could say like, subscribe to my newsletter, or you could say, join an exclusive group of some of the smartest people in the world. It's as to asking for the same outcome, but it's said very differently. The second one, it's not great copy, but it's better copy than the first one.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time on copywriting. That was probably one of my biggest unlocks as an entrepreneur, is to really understand. And I'm very lucky that I actually find it very enjoyable. So with copywriting, you start to find these things that they call them like a curiosity gap, right?
Yeah.
And so a classic curiosity gap is the 4-hour work week, right? Like the 4-hour work week, like, what? Come on. We all know that Tim Ferriss doesn't work 4 hours a week, but it's so catchy and so close enough to reality, like not so close to reality, but still constructed in a reality that we know. Like it almost sounds like the 4-day work week or the 24-hour work, like it doesn't feel so ridiculous, but it feels ridiculous at the same time. But regardless, you want to know more. You're like, I don't believe that's true, but tell me more.
Yep.
And that's where the 10K layering came in. And again, this is an amalgamation of a lot of different concepts. Time is money from Benjamin Franklin, Perry Marshall or the 80-20 principle, right? Like this took years, Josh. And so I'm just collecting these different components. And this is where I write every week. And so every week I get a little trial run on a new idea. And when I wrote that first piece, people were like, holy shit, that is awesome.
Yeah.
But that was like after writing 188 pieces prior.
And I'm assuming, and I know because I'm similar in this way, that gives you the ability, I'm guessing that you could tell right away, there's something in this concept that's resonating in a much bigger way than a lot of other stuff. But you only know that because you've tried so many different things, stuff to compare it to. But it sounds like, and I'm assuming that, as soon as you put that out in the world and you saw the reaction, that you realize, okay, there's something here.
People reacted pretty quickly. And again, it had a catchy name.
Yeah.
So it could travel visually with the matrix, and it could travel as with words. But again, that wasn't by design. It just happened that way. And then when I saw that, I just like double and triple down. And then what I realized, and you see this with many creators, is that it's like generalized framework enough that you can put I could do like the 10K work of entrepreneurship, right? Like the E-Myth, they have E-Myth for doctors, E-Myth for financial professionals, E-Myth for this. Once you have a generalized enough, but still specific container of ideas, 80-20 rule, you can then go in and just put it across all these different like verticals or niches. And then I just started like pushing it harder and harder. And like, it's a branding thing, but it works. Like, the Eisenhower matrix works. That's why people don't talk about it, because it works. Like, so it has to work too. It can't just be like a pretty chart that just shows a flow. It can't be like a pretty flow chart.
Yeah. It's funny, like there's a bunch of stuff that you said, and I'm going to kind of summarize and add a little bit to what you just said, because I do think it's interesting. I didn't know exactly where you were going to go with this when I asked the question, but as you were talking about it, it was just checking all these boxes of, oh yeah, I do that too, or I think that too, or I can totally see that. And that resonates with stuff that I've said before about different things. And one of the things I say to people all the time is pay attention to what catches your eyes. If you want to write better headlines, pay attention to the headlines that you click, right? If you want to write better ads, pay attention to the ads that make you stop and go, why did I stop on this? Why did this get me to stop scrolling? And what you're saying is essentially a version of that. Other thing that I think that this name and you did in your process, which is one of the biggest mistakes or one of the most important things to do that I see a lot of people go the other way, is clarity over cleverness. 10K work, if I know nothing, if you were like, what do you think 10K work is? People's guesses with zero context would be somewhat in the ballpark.
Yeah.
And I see so many people try to be clever in the branding of their thing. And as a result, the average person has no idea what they're talking. Right?
Yeah.
It's the super system. Okay. I don't know what the hell that is. The other thing, it's funny you referenced 4-hour work week because, and I can't remember where I heard this, but somebody pointed out that so many best-selling books, and if you look especially at like business book titles and stuff like that, the title is a thing that people want to be true, right? They want to believe that you can just work a 4-hour work. If you think about even that books like,
Think and Grow
essential.
Rich.
Yeah, Think and Grow Rich, essentialism. They want to believe that they can just focus on the essential stuff and that whatever, that they can simplify everything. And there's, that book Range, right? But generalists want to believe that being a generalist is better than whatever. So 10K work, I think in some ways fits into that too, right? First of all, they want to believe that some of their work is 10K value or 10. They want to believe that they don't have to spend a lot of time on $100 work or it is. And then the last thing, which again, I find so helpful in my own work, putting stuff out there so that you can get that feedback loop and so that you can see what people actually resonate. Cause I think there's a lot of people that they're not putting stuff out there, sitting there going, they don't want to put it out until they brand their concept or figure it out. And they're sitting with a list of names. If you had been doing that without putting stuff out, you sit with a list of names and go, do I like 10K work or do I like this other thing? I don't know. And I think all of that is really important. And so it's interesting to see you hit all those points and how they all come together to help you ultimately land on something powerful.
And the thing you're spot on in your synthesis. And the thing that I would add on is like, part of the reason why all this has come together is I've been doing it for 8 years, right? It'd be foolish if it wasn't coming together after 8 years. What I wanted to share is every week I send a newsletter. We're sending 364th issue today. We already queued it.
Congratulations.
So but I thank you. Every Monday, we send it on Saturday. I go in and I look at a few key things. I'm like, what was the most clicked story? And usually it's the essay that I write. I have a data point, which is, did they like my essay? Usually it's yes. But then we have it in a table, but I know it in my head. I'm like, oh, last week I wrote about toxic workplaces. It got 400 clicks. But when I wrote about Tom Brady, Giselle, and what that means for ambition in a marriage, it got 1,400 clicks. So people care much more. Again, one data point, but people care 3 times more about like ambition in relationships or zeitgeist positioning, like talking about the current moment, than like toxic workplaces, which is like a very known concept. So I've got that data point. Then the next data point that I look at, and I look at these every single Monday. It's a habit. I don't even have a task to do it. Then I look at the second most click, which wouldn't be mine, article. And I'm like, what story did they click on the most? That's like, I'm interested in this idea, or this is a really good framing, right? Like one that I remember being so high was like the 1-page productivity plan. I was like, oh, people want to know that they can have productivity on 1 page, right? Duh. But it also has a triple alliteration in it. And then the last thing I look at is what's the open rate? And now the open rate is a little biased because people have been opening for so long. But I still use it because I could be like, oh, 53 versus 48. And I'm like, maybe that headline wasn't as good. So I'm analyzing my headlines through this long history of open rates. And I just do that. So I've had 300, I haven't done it for 364 weeks, but let's say 275 times I've analyzed these 3 data points that it's baked into my intuition now.
Yeah, you learn a lot. This is a total side note, but it's one of the reasons why when I talk to people about newsletters, I'm not a fan of the full content in the newsletter, because when you put your full thing in the newsletter, you don't know if people clicked or not. You don't have a way of gauging their interest other than if some people reply. So I'm always a fan of like summary and link, because I want to know how many people were actually interested in that topic versus, I can gauge the open rates, but I don't know. Did they read it? Did they not read it? Did they care? Whatever.
And the last thing is we always have a little funny thing at the end. And it just started off as a funny ththing. It still is. It's usually one of the most clicked things, but that also tells me how many people made it to the bottom of the email.
Same way. Like I am always looking at that because it does. It tells you, did they read? Cool.